So I'd like to talk to you today about the influence of the American Legislative Exchange Council in labor reforms in America. So state legislatures are uh, they are organized the way that our national legislature is. So you have a House, a Senate, a state Supreme Court, a president, a governor, but you have an executive. Uh, you have an executive at the national level, the president. At your state level is the governor. And so state legislatures act a lot like the national legislature in how the process works with how a bill becomes a law. So the exception to this structure is Nebraska, which actually doesn't have an upper house, but that's not particularly important for our discussion today. So, a bill becomes a law in your state legislature, much like it does in the national legislature, and the reason that we focus a lot on state legislatures in this course is because when it comes to labor policy, most of the action is on the state level. So what the state legislatures are doing when it comes to right to work or public employee unions or who's allowed to unionize and collectively bargain and who's not, a lot of that is influenced by state policy. So, theoretically starts with an idea for a bill. This bill gets written, the bill gets introduced on the floor of the House or the Senate, the bill gets assigned to committee, the bill gets debated in committee, voted on in committee, brought out of committee, sent to the floor, debated on the floor, voted, sent to the governor's desk, the governor signs the bill into law, and then your state bureaucracy implements what is in that bill. So one of the things that's important to note, though, is that our state legislatures don't just act independently. They don't only look at what is happening in Georgia, or what is happening in Ohio, or what is happening in Texas. They don't only look at what's happening within their own state. They pay attention to what other states are doing. And when we see a policy where one government is making a decision that is influenced by another government's decision, we refer to that as policy diffusion, where a policy is being adopted, in this case, by multiple states, one after the other, the same the same policy. So the decisions of one government are influencing the decisions of another government. So if Tennessee decides to pass a policy regarding charter schools, then Georgia might be looking at Tennessee and looking at what they're doing for charter schools and say, well, that's a good idea. We should do that too. So where does ALEC come in? ALEC ALEC stands for the American Legislative Exchange Council, as I mentioned earlier. And for short, they call themselves ALEC. And they have on their website that they are a large, nonpartisan, voluntary membership group, organization of state legislators dedicated to limited government, free markets, and federalism. And so generally conservative ideals. And they don't make a list of their members public. We can't know exactly who their members are completely, though some legislators are vocal about being members of ALEC and others are not. And so this is a network. It's a network of state legislators and other interested stakeholders that craft model legislation. And they craft a lot of model legislation that has the underlying theme of limited government and low taxes and individual rights and more conservative, ideologically positioned policies. And so what they do is they actually have model legislation on their website. If you go to ALEC.org and you poke around their website a little bit, which I suggest you do, you will see that they have a lot of information about themselves. They have some policy briefs. They have actual model bills for different topics that they cover. The one important for our discussion is, of course, labor policies. So what happens as I bring this back to policy diffusion, what happens is, rather than state legislators saying, hey, look, this policy in Oklahoma brought down unemployment, or this policy in Utah helped decrease homelessness. Let's adopt a policy like that. Instead of that happening, it goes more like this group of legislators throughout the country craft bills, and then they take those model bills back to their home state, and they tweak them to fit their state, and then they introduce the bill. And so you end up seeing, if you track what's going on in state legislatures, you end up seeing the same types of bills spread all across the country, being introduced around the same time, within the same few years. And this isn't a coincidence. A lot of this has to do with groups like ALEC. If not ALEC themselves, then other groups like ALEC that organize and craft model legislation and shop it out to the different legislatures. So, an example of this, as if you are paying attention to what's been happening in 2019, is a lot of states are taking up heartbeat bills. So there are abortion law bills that once a doctor can detect a heartbeat, you're no longer allowed to get an abortion. And this is being signed into law in Georgia and Ohio and other states. And this is probably not a coincidence. There's some policy diffusion going on here. Now, I'm not saying that ALEC is behind those bills, but it's the same process. One state is adopting a policy, the other states are watching, and the different organizations involved in crafting policy are shopping their ideas, their policy solutions, to solve a policy problem. So when it comes to labor policies and ALEC's influence, it's kind of difficult to determine how much they influence labor policy in the states. There's a lot of literature now, recently, about state legislatures being influenced by groups like ALEC. And it seems pretty clear that they have some influence, that legislators don't stand up when they introduce a bill and say, this bill came from ALEC. No, of course, they say, I wrote this bill, I endorsed this bill, and this bill is going to solve our public employment woes. And so because the membership of ALEC is not clear, and people don't claim credit, ALEC doesn't claim direct credit for bills, it is difficult to say with a lot of certainty, this bill came from ALEC, this bill didn't. However, we can compare the model bill language from their website to the actual bills that are being introduced across the country. And what we end up seeing is there's a lot of these bills that are kind of copy and pasted with very minor changes that quite clearly came from this organization. And I will touch on a couple that are related to public employees. So the Public Employee Bargaining Transparency Act is a model piece of legislation from ALEC that requires that documents related to public employee bargaining be public record, so they're open to the public. So that kind of exposes the bargaining process to the public, which, yes, the public then becomes more informed about the bargaining process with their public employees and their tax dollars, but it also makes it difficult for managers and employers to bargain honestly and discuss some issues, knowing that the public is going to be aware of exactly what's being said and exchanged. Let's see, there's also the Public Employee Payroll Deduction Act. This one prohibits public employers from directly withdrawing public employee dues for labor union dues. So you work for, the city. The city cuts your paycheck. Your paycheck is direct deposited into your account. A lot of times the paycheck will deduct union dues or agency fees, as they're different things, which I talked about earlier, but we don't need to rehash that. They deduct it before you get your paycheck, so it just comes automatically out of your paycheck to cover the cost of collective bargaining. So if you opt out of being in the union, they don't deduct those dues. This piece of model legislation prohibits employers from doing that, period. So even if you are a member of the labor union in your workplace, you have to then take it from your paycheck and give it to the union afterwards, rather than have it automatically deducted. Let's see, another one is the Public Employee Freedom Act, which is meant to make it so that public employees can opt out of being even covered by the collective bargaining agreement, even if they're not in the union and they're in a unionized workplace. Basically this model legislation says, well, an individual employee should be able to contract with their employer however they wish, regardless of whether there's a union in the workplace or not. Some of this, so it's an individual rights issue, but it also undermines the power of the collective bargaining, which is meant to raise wages and benefits for the workers. So there's two sides to this story, so to speak. So let's see. The connection between ALEC and these policies is not totally clear. There's some question. There's a website called ALEC Exposed that draws the comparisons between different ALEC bills, and what's being introduced in state legislatures. There's other work, some of it that you may have read, about how state legislatures are influenced by ALEC and these types of groups. The one thing that gets confusing is sometimes it's just not easy to come to the conclusion, yes, this is an ALEC bill. Sometimes it seems pretty clear, right? Like the bill being introduced in whatever state is copied and pasted from the website, like word for word. There's no differences at all. You can pretty safely say this is an ALEC piece of legislation. Other times the bills are changed enough and the bills have different things in them that aren't, they kind of just borrowed some language, or at least it appears that way. In my own research, I was researching a collective bargaining bill, Ohio Senate Bill 5, years ago, and I spoke with state legislators and members of different policy think tanks, liberal and conservative, and other stakeholders, labor union activists, Democrats and Republicans, and a lot of the Democrats said, this bill that's taking away labor union rights, this is definitely ALEC. This came straight from ALEC. There's no doubt about it. It's an ALEC piece of legislation. Then I would talk to other people that were either Republicans or for the bill or both, and they would say, no, this has nothing to do with ALEC. This isn't a piece of Senate Bill 5 isn't a piece of ALEC legislation. And the most convincing, sometimes people lie to you when you're interviewing them, but the most interesting interview I had was with somebody who was, they had actually in their office a plaque of some sort that said ALEC Board of Directors. They were a proud member of the American Legislative Exchange Council, and this representative was a Republican in the state of Ohio who was vocally against Ohio Senate Bill 5, which stripped away a lot of the bargaining rights for public employees in Ohio. It didn't end up getting enacted, but that's another issue. So the bill never actually went into effect. But he was vocally against the bill. And so I asked him, I said, okay, so I keep getting people who say ALEC is behind this bill. And then I get, now I'm talking to somebody who's a member of ALEC, a proud member of ALEC, and is a Republican who actually voted against the bill and was very vocal about how the bill was stupid. His words, not mine. And he, when I asked him this question, I'm like, so was this a piece of ALEC legislation? He denied that it had anything to do with ALEC and talked about how it was just too stupid of an idea. The mechanisms in the bill were too stupid. It was just asinine, and that nothing that stupid could ever come out of ALEC, and that the connection that people are drawing between ALEC and this bill is just a way that liberals try to trash ALEC. So, I would be tempted to say that maybe he's lying, but he voted against the bill. He was very vocally against the bill. So I don't know that there would be any reason to lie to me in that interview. Maybe some people did. Somebody wasn't telling the truth, because I had some people telling me one thing and some people telling me another. But the point is, the connections aren't always so clear. We can see where some of these labor reforms strongly resemble things coming out of the American Legislative Exchange Council, and that we can pretty confidently say that they do have a strong influence over some policies coming through state legislatures. And then we have other cases where we're just not really sure. The lines aren't so clear. So I think it's important to know who the American Legislative Exchange Council is and their possible influence in public employee and private employee, actually, just labor union reforms in general.